Hi, good evening. Welcome once again to the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show right here. We also coming to you live on YouTube on the Guyanese Critic page. Wherever you're joining us from, I want to say a warm welcome to you, warm good night or good morning or good day to you. It's always a pleasure as we come to you to talk about the business of our people. Today happens to be World Teachers Day. I want to say, congratulations to all our teachers. We can't say enough about our appreciation for the work that they do under trying circumstances. We know that the pandemic that we would have just gone through still happening a little way. We still got to be very careful, but the teachers were really put on the strain then because you had to operate remotely, many of them, without internet and under terrible conditions, and it was very trying times. As we celebrate World Teachers Day, we have to continuously encourage our teachers, and it's a very noble profession, and so are our nurses and policemen, so many others, countless public professionals, and we say that we do appreciate. But Teachers Day, it is today, so it's October the 5th, 2022, and we happen to know what that means. In 1992, October the 5th, Elections Day, it was a very special day for especially the PPP, Progressive Party, and you know that they would be observing, talking about that, what it meant for, according to that party, which is in power now, democracy in this country. In a very short while, I'm going to hand you over to my co-host, who I want to say good night to, Freddie Kissoon. Always good to talk to him, and of course, he gives his analysis on issues that are happening in Guyana, and we discuss those things so we can be able to share with you our thoughts on developments in Guyana. Tonight, he's going to do the honors of introducing our guest. Interesting fellow here. I never met him officially, but I would have read because my dad died in 1980 in January, was killed as a policeman in 1980, and just around that period would have been some very terrible events in Guyana in the history books with regards to the death of one Dr. Walter Rodney. And so it is good to discuss that because coming forward in just around the 2015-2020 period, some interesting things happened with regards to Dr. Rodney's party. So without further ado, I will go straight on to Freddie Kissoon and let him take us through before we start asking our guests some questions.
Thank you, Leonard. And our guest is the brother of Dr. Walter Rodney, who was unfortunately catapulted into international fame because he was in the car when his brother was assassinated. Before I make the formal introduction, there has been a development that I'd like to inform all our viewers wherever you are in the world. I have more than 50 years experience in social activism. I've had more than 26 years in academia, and I've lived through the Burnham years, and I've never seen anything like this at all. Never seen anything like this. I'd like to read for you what was told to me by one of the leading Guyanese American scholars, a man with a very impressive CV and teaches at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. As I said before, I've never seen this even on the Burnham days. Here is what this scholar wrote to me, and I'm reading his letter. I called and spoke to Anand Prasad, editor of Starbook News, and he acknowledged receiving my letters. Said they weren't published because they're critical of civil society groups, including Article 13. I said, why don't you publish it and let the public decide? He did not answer to that. I reminded him that SN has published numerous articles, actually a couple hundred at least. I asked what has changed, and shockingly he simply said oil and gas. He characterized my employer, the government of Guyana, as my minder. I objected. I told him I knew persons like Christopher are honorable with high credibility. I then pointed out that my article was an Article 13, and no individual was named, and that was intentional. I basically said to him that an organization like Article 13 can and does have a personality. I told him I drew on the work of French philosopher Lacan and presented arguments based on Lacan's influential work. He still characterized my article as having ad hominism. I strongly disagreed. I asked him if I could consider the conversation a matter of record, and he said yes. I asked him if it is not important to give the views of someone at the government of Guyana, the Ali presidency. He said no, not if they criticize civil society groups. I told him that many of Article 13 statements are clearly and conspicuously inaccurate and untruthful. He brushed that off. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and it took place around 11:15 this morning, October 5, a day of extraordinary coincidence. I would appreciate it if you would write something on this. Many more things were said, but I can only relate in person. He said he does not take call on letters. I acknowledge that and thank him for speaking with me. I would characterize the tone as defensive and combative, and at the same time, still salute him for picking up the phone. It did not matter to him that I'm a highly qualified individual. I told him I did 37 years of university teaching. I will send you a write-up on my curriculum vitae. This is the first time in the history of journalism that an editor of a major newspaper told a major scholar in Guyana, we will not carry your letters if it criticizes certain organization. Even Burnham days, I don't think the editor would tell someone with that status, if you criticize civil society, we're not publishing your letters. This is something I'm asking viewers to take up. This is a terrible, terrible development in journalism. With that in mind, I will come back to this article when we're about to close. Let me now introduce Donald Rodney. Donald Rodney is the brother of Dr. Walter Rodney. Dr. Walter Rodney asked his brother Donald Rodney to accompany him on June the 13th, 1980, to do an errand. Dr. Rodney did not survive after June 13. There was a bomb that was placed in his car, and it exploded and dismembered Dr. Rodney. Sitting next to him driving the car was his brother, Donald Rodney. Donald Rodney was severely injured and subsequently charged by the Burnham government for having participated in the murder of his own brother. We will take up that issue because there's a lot of surreptitiousness and conspiracy involving the trial of Donald Rodney. Donald, welcome to the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon Show, and I hope our viewers would know this, what you have to say is not for the faint-hearted. My first question to you, can a human psychologically survive the incident, the tragedy that you went through? Your brother, a world-famous academic and a regional revolutionary activist, was in the car next to you when a bomb secretly placed by a government agent, a former soldier named Gregory Smith, exploded in Donald Rodney's lap. He died and you almost died. Have you recovered psychologically? And if yes, how did that recovery come about?
Thank you, Freddie, and thank you, Mr. Gildarie. And good day or good night to your viewers, wherever they are. Yes, I think I've survived psychologically. Obviously, it's something that stands out in my life, like a watershed, but there have been other things in my life that have been happening since, and it's quite some time, and to that extent, I survived and got on with other things. Yes.
Leonard?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think some of those events would have been recorded. I think my recollection says that there was a COI and that you also would have given your testimony during the COI. Is that correct?
Oh yes, I give testimony at the COI, which is very important. Even though at the COI there were two other pieces of evidence that I think was even more important, and I'll just touch on them, if I may. One was the evidence from the GDF captain who took Gregory Smith from Timeri the morning after the assassination.
Gregory Smith is the man who was alleged to have given your brother the walkie-talkie.
Gregory Smith has clearly been identified as the person who actually triggered the bomb, triggered the remote bomb, to answer your question. And his existence was denied from the night of the explosion. Well, rather from a few days after, when I named him. From a few days after when I named him. For some 15 years, before the then Chief of Staff of the GDF admitted that Gregory Smith was a member of the Army. But let's get back very on track to the issue of the Commission of Inquiry. So one piece of evidence was the fact that the captain, a GDF captain, took Gregory Smith from Timeri to the interior.
There's an army base at Timeri.
Well, I assume so, but I'm not saying so for sure. What I'm sure is that the facts reveal that he was taken from Timeri to the interior, and subsequently taken from there, from that location to French Guiana. So that's one piece of evidence that was brought up by the Commission of Inquiry. That is important. The other piece that is important is the fact that Gregory Smith had written a book. It was titled The Cry of a Failed Revolution, The Truth About the Death of Walter Rodney. And I think at one time it might have been a bestseller in Georgetown. He had written the book. It was published posthumously and published with his sisters as the co-author. And that book turned out to be, rather than the truth, a statement of false and fictitious events. And that too was revealed at the Commission of Inquiry. I did say two, but I'll mention just one other, and that is the evidence from the immigration officer who comes under the Commissioner of Police, and that officer was able to bring documentary evidence that Gregory Smith was given a false name and a passport under the false name to escape from Guyana by the Commissioner of Police.
The conclusions there that there was state assistance to do his escape, or was that the conclusion?
Well, the unavoidable conclusion is that you've got collusion in the assassination by the police, head of the police, the Commissioner of Police. You've got collusion by the Army, and even though this is a captain who actually gave evidence, he would have been taking orders from on high. And the only individual who would have control over the police and the Army would be the head of state.
I want to jump into something that I always wanted to ask, and ask somebody who would have been very close to this entire affair. There were two narratives that were being played out. One, Walter Rodney was murdered. Two, he caused his own death by having an explosive device in his possession. To your knowledge, sir, and I know that you've already made some statements to that effect, could you state to the public who's listening keenly right now, what are the evidence that presented itself that you could say to them that I am definitively sure that it was a murder, and if there's any evidence that you came across later on that would have said that the state was involved and maybe even Burnham was involved in the ordering of his death?
Art, I will try. There is a version of a narrative that Walter Rodney and myself, his sibling, was on the way to the Georgetown prison with a bomb when it exploded. And how that version came about is unclear to me, because the version was put out without the person saying how they got the information. It turned out at my trial that I made a statement in my own defense, at my trial. That statement in the record was taken out of the court record and substituted by this very story that Donald Rodney and Walter Rodney were on their way to the Georgetown prison when the bomb exploded. Now, if, in other words, what I had to say was taken out, and this version that that you referred to and that I've clarified was inserted in the place. In other words, like if Donald Rodney is saying this, that is what is being made of, a false and fictitious statement.
At your trial?
Subsequent to the trial.
Subsequent to the trial.
Because the court record doesn't show that I made a defense statement. The court record showed that the statement I made was the version that Mr. Gildarie has referred to. The unavoidable conclusion is that there is absolutely no evidence for that version other than putting it in the court record and ascribing it to me falsely.
But Donald, let's
No,
get...
he's not, I have asked a specific question. Growing up in the 80s, Freddie Kissoon, and listening to my neighbors, and I did tell you about who were living around me, some WPA folks and so on, I always came to the conclusion, based on what they were saying, that the WPA blamed the death of Walter Rodney at the doorsteps of Burnham and the government ruling because of events that led from that. One, they facilitated the escape of the man who triggered the bomb. And I grew up learning that. So this is why I'll ask, what was the evidence that Donald Rodney would have gotten, or anybody else at WPA, which would have linked or which established that the government of the day, which was the People's National Congress, was the one that organized and did it?
Why I jumped in here? Why I jumped in is because one has to be a very, very stupid person, an extremely stupid person, so stupid that it's beyond imagination. Where in history, where the past 2,000 years, an internationally famous man, the leader of a party, takes his brother and go to bomb, two men in a car, and go to bomb the central prison of a country, when his party has thousands of people, and that is the way it happens in history. Now, I think this is so vulgar that I don't even want the words to come out of my mouth. To say that someone, a civilized person, would believe that the famous Dr. Walter Rodney, the famous scholar, the famous politician in Guyana, picks his brother up and say, let's go and bomb. Two people, just two people in the car, let's go and bomb the Georgetown prison. Well, I'll tell you this.
The intention is that civilized person that you're referring to would believe it because the witness said so.
Yeah.
Donald Rodney, me,
Yeah.
the witness, said so. This is what they're making out.
Yeah, this is what they put in your trial subsequently.
That's correct. So when you say this civilized person would have to be stupid to believe it. The civilized person is left without any alternative because the witness who is there says so,
Would,
according to the record that they have contaminated.
Donald, the man who prosecuted you, Rex McKay, and you have been subsequently, made free, or the charges were dropped. You were subsequently exonerated in your appeal that took 30-something years. And in that exoneration, the Court of Appeal ruled that your trial was actually a mistrial.
Well, they say there was no evidence.
There's no evidence, no.
There was never any evidence.
The man who prosecuted you is now 100 years old. I think he is. Mr. Rex McKay. I don't know what mental state he's in. But he also prosecuted Anna Rampasad, in which Donald Rodney was very much involved. Walter Rodney was very much how do you forgive Rex McKay? Do you think you have gone past what he did to you?
Well, it's not for me to forgive. I think it is for the public to understand what happened at the time of the incident, what happened in the aftermath, and for that to go down clearly in the history book in an uncontroverted way as the plain truth, and we take it from there. We have not reached the stage where that plain truth is clearly and widely accepted. We have not reached the stage where the perpetrators have accepted their involvement. So it's really not for me to be
forgiven.
No, it would be highly inappropriate for me to be giving forgiveness or offering forgiveness when my role is still to say what really happened. Cannot at the same time be saying I'm giving forgiveness. It has to be established without controversy what happened, and I am in the process of doing this or saying this.
But Leonard, for our young viewers, this man, this situation is really unique in world history. If Guyana was a more well-known, famous country, that thing would have hit history books all over the world. The state assassinated a world-famous figure and then charged his brother for being part or conspiring in the assassination. And then at the man's trial, bogus information, no evidence was led him. And then there's something else that's done.
They then substituted.
Put into the case jacket something that he did not say. One has to understand what is going through this man's mind the past 40 years. But more importantly than that, and our viewers have to hear this now. Do you know, and I want you to spend some time, do you know this man's appeal was heard without he appealing? And in this appeal, his conviction, was affirmed, and his jails. And he doesn't know, and his lawyer doesn't know, that he has appealed. And he said to me that 2 judges of the judiciary was involved in this conspiratorial illegality. Donald?
What was the effect, just before you answer that, Mr. Rodney, what was the effect of that his sentence remained what it was?
In the unknown appeal.
In the unknown appeal.
Yeah. He know nothing about the appeal. His lawyers know nothing in appeal. There was appeal at the court, and we don't know up to now who the process by which it's appealed. Let's
call it a clandestine hearing, because the appeal court
involving high court judges.
That's correct. Let's call it a clandestine hearing, because the appeal court has ruled, and it's on the record, that so-called appeal is unlawful. So the appeal court, the higher court, has some amount of vindication in saying that so-called hearing is unlawful. But the question still remains that you have raised. How could it be contemplated, even tolerated, that someone on the bench can call an appeal when there's no appeal filed and they have no authority to call that appeal, much less to hear it? And the DPP's representative attends, and it is said by the person who's on the bench, the judges on the bench, that since the appellant, quote unquote, because the appellant doesn't know that this appeal is supposedly heard, since the appellant has not turned up, we're going to dismiss the appeal. The effect of that, Mr. Gildarie raised an important point. The effect of that is that the bail, I was on bail at the time, the bail is terminated, the sentence is reinstituted, and I, as a person involved, become liable to be rearrested and jailed by the police, who now have this dismissal that they can use. That is the effect.
In that time, how long did you spend in jail? Let's say from the initial conviction.
Well, in fact, I spent time in jail. I was given bail at the end of the magistrate court trial in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's only because I couldn't raise bail that I was held in remand in the prison yard. Well, if actually in solitary confinement. So, the time I actually spent in solitary confinement on remand, if that's not a contradiction, was just 3 weeks. And then I came out after bail was raised. So that's the answer to that question.
All right, I want to ask you, because I did not get this very clear, because I have a number of other questions to you, and coming forward to 2015, 2020, because everything is linked. Did you conclude who or what was targeted? Let me don't use what. Who were the persons that was targeting you, and maybe it is to do away with questions as to who were behind the death of Walter Rodney?
Oh yeah, my charge was really collateral.
Your collateral damage, you say?
That's correct. In trying to cover up the assassination. Part of the problem is that there was a witness when they didn't expect there'd be a witness. And that witness had to be silent in one way or another. As it was, they decided to charge me to attempt to keep me silent. Mr. Kissoon earlier on talked about what the charge was, whether it was attempted murder or something similar. That charge was considered, as I understand it, at one time, because it's a serious charge and bail is not available.
Attempted murder, I think now is bailable.
All right. But to finish off,
Yeah.
the intention was to silence me even then, but they were not successful in removing bail or restricting me from having bail, so I was able to come out. So in fact, they lost at that stage. But subsequently, they went through with the trial, and having got a conviction, this so-called clandestine appeal hearing was then a second bite at silencing me, because if one had genuinely lodged an appeal and not turned up and is dismissed, you have quite a hurdle to ask the court again to hear your appeal. You have quite a hurdle.
I know Gildarie asked this question. I asked him, when was this vulgar, conspiratorial, non-existent appeal heard? What year was that?
I think it's about 2009.
those judges, as far as you know, since we can't call name, those judges are still practicing law on the bench in Guyana.
One is.
One is?
Well, beg your pardon. One is alive.
Oh, well, being alive and being on the bench is being on the bench are two different things.
I know, but I can't answer about whether he is on the bench, but I'm sure he's still alive.
Thank you very much. All right. Just before we get into to some questions that I have. During that time between 1982 onwards to 2015, did you keep close to the WPA?
Yes,
The party of Walter Rodney?
I worked with the WPA. When,
As an executive member?
well, no, I wasn't the executive member. Never got to that level.
Oh.
I was just an ordinary member
Oh.
and participated in.
Did they give you any help during 1982 to say that you could have gotten some legal help or so on?
Oh, they gave a lot of help.
Oh.
I tried. You asked more than one question, so I
Right,
tried
sure.
to deal with both, and you have to remind me if I haven't answered both. They offered a lot of help. Mr. Dudnod Singh, SC at the time, no, subsequently, he was the attorney who led my defense, and a lot of his involvement had to do with Mr. Moses Bagwan, the name you called. He was a liaison in arranging for Mr. Singh to be on board. So I got a lot of help from the WPA in that regard. I also got a lot of help in terms of distribution of my statement, which I made as soon as possible after the bomb attack, a few days after. So I got a lot of help in that regard. But you'll ask something else if I don't want to go back.
All right, we jump right into it. Leading up to, ladies and gentlemen, leading up to the 2015 elections, there was a coalition of government, APNU AFC. Part of the APNU configuration was the WPA, Working People's Alliance, which was Walter Rodney's party. And they joined up as one of the parties under the APNU's umbrella. Freddie, if I'm making any mistake here, just correct me.
Yeah, sure.
And WPA joined up under the APNU configuration to form the coalition along with the AFC. I want to ask you first, Mr. Rodney, do you think that Walter Rodney's legacy was tainted because of the WPA's position in the last, let's say, the years between 2015 2020?
Well, I think things were turned on their head quite clearly, because here was at one time the party that was in power at the time when Walter was assassinated, and that same party is now in alliance with the party.
Were you shocked?
That was once, well, let's say associated, but at one time led by Walter Rodney. So things go full circle, turn on his head and so on. I would say that the present WPA ought to have the opportunity to give an explanation. I can't represent them. And so when I speak, please bear in mind, it's not on their behalf at all.
No, of course.
Yeah. So they ought to be given an opportunity to say whether it is they misunderstood earlier on, or whether it is they had a born again revelation. They're the ones who have to explain that.
The Dr. Walter Rodney would have had some ideals as to where he wants his country, as to what his party should have been doing. Do you think that was reflected by what some people would say here was an opportunity, in my view, and being in government would have been an opportunity. You can't get a better opportunity to say, look, these are what we've been striving for, this is what we believe in. Do you believe there were any kind of performance from the WPA side of things where they would have stood up and said, look, shouting it across the rooftops that this is where we stand, and although we're in government, we want to use this opportunity regardless of what the PNC would have allegedly did or did, that they probably would have lost a golden opportunity by not even performing? I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Again, they should be the ones who should say. I really have no thoughts on how they move forward and did or did not take up advantage of opportunities to attempt to, for example, institute some of their principles.
Well, you were very close to him, brother. You're a citizen of Guyana. You must have your own thoughts as to, as a member of that party, as to what are some of the things. I would have a fundamental issue if the party that I'm part of, and I ended up collaborating, forming an alliance with a let's say the PNC. I would have my thoughts as to whether that would have been a good thing or not. If you argue to me and say, look, the PNC went down a road, but here's an opportunity for me to enter government, and I could be able to do some of the things that my leader, Walter Rodney, wanted. And that is along that line I really wanted to hear.
I could only look on in askance as anyone else. I've never approached them to try to elicit an explanation, or they ever come forward.
Did you form an opinion as to their performance?
No, as I said, I would just look on in askance.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead, Freddie.
No,
I have some other questions.
Donald, this program is going to be logged for posterity. There is a nagging. A nagging is a mal word. There is this ubiquitous thing all over the world when people discuss that death, that assassination, and the subsequent behavior of WPA leaders. Donald, do you think there was a very, very valuable agent in the WPA leadership that was aiding the Burnham government?
I have no idea. I am terrible at matters like conspiracy and cloak and dagger. I must say. So I really don't know. What I know is that under the PNC in the days when fear was reigned by the Burnham government, conspiracy theories and so-called double agents were like under every brick in the road. And it's hard to tell which might be genuine and which might be not.
But hold on.
So you're talking about one now that you feel has manifested itself.
Look at some facts that are so large that they're larger than the three great rivers of Guyana. Oini Kwame left the WPA's office with guns in his trunk. By the time he reached South Rumpel, the police intercepted him, shot him dead without any explanation. One person arrived at the airport, security just cornered him off and knew that there was a gun under the suitcase, a false bottom in the suitcase.
David Hines.
Yes. There were so many other incidents like that. Now, here what I would like your thoughts on. I read an interview with Rupert Rupnarine in, I think, a Canadian newspaper, the West Indian, in which he said he was friends with David Granger for a very long time. David Granger is his personal friend. But Mr. Granger was second in the army, and Joe Harmon was chief of military intelligence at the time Rodney was assassinated. So, Rupert Rupnarine, now if you read Rupert Rupnarine's book, The Sky's Wild Noise, he made it clear that he was perhaps the closest to Rodney than anyone else. For example, he said when Rodney was leaving Guyana illegally to attend summit in Zimbabwe,
Independence
Zimbabwe, Walter only told him and Walter's wife. That is extreme closeness. For the history books and for history, how could a man be so close to Walter in 1978, 79, 80, and yet so close to the deputy head of the army? And people, the Commission for Inquiry has implicated the army and the state in the assassination of your brother?
Well, for the purpose of history, there ought to be research to whatever requisite standard. Research should be carried out. I don't have the information you have, particularly about the connection between Rupert Rupnarayan and others. So I've never been able to give it my contemplation. But I would say, yes, it's worth analyzing.
Gildarie?
Sure. Mr. Rodney, interesting revelations and a couple statements here. Freddie, and I think you did raise the issue earlier. I remember reading a couple of times and of some parts of history of the United States. One of the most interesting things, or the biggest mystery, was who killed the JFK. And we know that there would have been an arrest and so on. And they always talk about the grassy knoll in which the shots were probably fired from. And interesting, and then the death of Marilyn Monroe and so on. These are all things, people always mesmerize people across the nation. And he did raise an issue here which would have made probably a good book to read had we delved into it. But you find so many times in the Guyanese history that there's only one narrative being played out because somebody wrote about it. I think you would have had Sila Al-Prasad wrote his book, and then you had a perspective of the police force from somebody who was in it, talk about racialism and other things. But it just kind of hurt my heart a little in that if we write in history that we should have several narratives. But interestingly, Mr. Rodney, you have given some perspective as to what you think would have happened. And I know that you would have been close to your brother also. He would have been, you would have been right there, and especially at his last moments. I want to ask you, with regards to the 2020 elections and knowing who Walter Rodney was, again coming back to his ideals, what he dreamed of, what he wanted for this country. If you had to hazard a guess, or you had to tell the people what you think your brother, knowing what he stood for, what would you say would have been his thoughts of the 2020 elections, and what would have played out there?
All right, I'm not going to put myself in a position of trying to say what was in his mind even when he was alive.
Right.
Much less what might have been in his mind after he's passed away. But certainly when he was alive, democracy was one of the cornerstones of his campaign. The campaign in the late 70s, going into 1980, when he was actually killed, was really against a regime that was legitimately elected in the first place, but then moved on to manipulating elections to keep itself in office, and then moved on to the crown, as they saw it, of unilaterally putting in place a constitution that nobody wanted. Now, these were things that Walter Rodney fought against, and for which he lost his life. So, without attempting to read his mind, I would say certainly democracy was a cornerstone of his campaign at all times.
2020 elections, would you have said that he would have been, some people would say, turning in the grave as to what transpired? And I'm not asking you to cast blame, but I'm asking you what played out there. And maybe if you had a formation of an opinion as to what would have transpired there.
No, I think he would have stood up for democracy. And the rigging that or attempted rigging that we saw in 2020 was a throwback to the sort of manipulation that occurred in the earlier days of the early version of the PNC.
Just let me look at the camera and tell the viewers, if they heard what Donald Rodney, the brother of Walter Rodney, is saying, and I don't want the gentleman to repeat it, I am sitting next to him. He's saying if Walter Rodney was alive, his position on the March 2020 election is that democracy should allowed its...
Period, yes.
And he he also classified, right here, he's right in front of me, he also classified the March 2020 election drama as attempted rigging of the elections. I hope viewers have heard that. And when people talk about the election being rigged, if they're Indian, they're racist. If they're African, they're betrayers of African people. And all kinds of unimaginable and incredible descriptions are put on them when they say the election was rigged or attempted to rig. Are there people out there tonight, wherever they are they going to say that Donald Rodney, who almost lost his life through a conspiracy by Forbes Burnham, and I didn't say that, the Commission of Inquiry said that, is Donald Rodney a betrayer for saying that the election, there were attempts to rig it? I'm asking viewers out there, this man that went through so much, not only saw his brother die next to him, then he was charged, then his trial was a fake trial, then there was a fake appeal. I'm asking viewers outside there, Gildarie, I'm looking at you in your eyes. People are going to call this man a betrayer?
But there's no need to sensationalize it or dramatize it. I am not an authority on elections and attempted rigging. But I think, as one observer said, the former Prime Minister from Jamaica, he had never seen such a blatant attempt. And this is somebody who had gone through several elections in the Caribbean and observed elections elsewhere. And though the same words weren't used by the former Barbadian Prime Minister, whose name slips me right now, he said the same thing. He was astonished and dismayed. I am not an authority, it's they who have said it.
Gildarie, this is a priceless moment. Recording of history. Right now, the three of us here.
You know what?
This is a priceless moment.
You don't have to over-sensationalize it.
You know what has blown me away here is him talking about that appeal. I have a lawyer, Freddie Kissoon, and I presume you have some knowledge of lawyers and the way that they operate. My lawyer cannot go ahead and do anything without my permission, meaning I have to literally sign forms and forms to give her okay. I have to give her my consent. I have to sign something. And for the state or for somebody to take it upon themselves, or whoever it is, and don't appeal for the man, and he's not even there, that is beyond ridiculous.
There's no signed application form for the appeal.
You have to get that from the man.
There's no signed application form for the appeal.
This thing is insane. Let's recap it for readers. He eventually was acquitted in his appeal because the DPP asked the court, the appeal court, to dismiss the charge because she said in the original trial there was no evidence of criminality in his part. Yet this bogus appeal, the DPP office sent a lawyer to prosecute him.
Well, let me tell you something.
Donald, you have to explain.
I don't have the explanation.
You have to.
I don't have that. I'm saying I'm astonished, but I don't have the explanation.
But Freddie,
somebody wanted for you to get jail. I wonder if it's an aging lawyer that has a grievance against you from those times.
I don't. But Freddie, you see it in different countries that people would have been jailed or because of this justice system, and they would have gone on sue the state and receive money. I think again we got to start moving in that thing. When there's a miscarriage of justice or people abuse the system, that people should have recourse to go back and substantially get the kind of thing, because how do you put a figure, that's the other issue, how do you put a figure to the kind of abuse that you would have had, the kind of trauma that you have, going through that, watching
this is one of the most trauma, this is one of the most abused person in contemporary Guyanese history. I cannot get over it that he saw his brother died alongside him, and then you carry him through that, and now we reached another dimension that we haven't discussed. he was not able to find employment. Let us
What
talk
happened?
about that.
You turned up at jobs and you apply. What happened?
No, no. When after I was charged, I went abroad in the 70s on the basis of a government scholarship at the expense of taxpayers in Guyana to the UK to study quantity surveying, which is construction economics. And I came back and I was in the public service at the time of the assassination. What happens on the public service rules when you are charged is that you're interdicted. That means you're off the job, you get half your salary until the trial is completed. Even before the trial was completed, I was told that we're going to make sure you don't get work in this country. At that time, it may sound strange now, but at that time, the government really controlled some 80%
Of the employment.
of the economy.
Okay.
That was the famous figure, 80%.
Donald,
But I might have lost track of your question, so remind me what you would ask.
no,
You had kids. I
No,
think
no,
maybe you want to put in context. You had kids.
no.
and so
My
on.
question
What
was
do you
that you
interrupt?
didn't have employment, but I think this subject of this bogus appeal is so fascinating. Donald, could you remember the name of the DPP? You said it was around 2009 was a bogus. Could you remember who was the DPP then?
It could be established. The record would show that.
But you can't remember. I know it was not the present DPP.
All right,
She
but
was not.
Okay, but the record would say.
But shouldn't the state have an investigation
In any case,
and ask and prosecute that person who was DPP?
But in
Don't-
any case, the office holder, the current office holder, would be responsible for the action of their predecessor. In this case, because it's the office holder who is responsible in each instance.
No, I don't understand that, Gildarie. What could you explain that to me?
No.
The current DPP is
I'm saying
Ms. Shalima.
the current DPP takes responsibility for the actions of their predecessor. In other words, if the
Is that so?
I can't comment on that. I
the
don't know that.
DPP would have, let's say, for the sake, not my case, but say for the very sake of an example, would have carried out an action against an individual, and that individual subsequently was acquitted. That individual is going to take action against the state years after, and it's a different person who's occupying the office of the DPP. The action is still against the office of the DPP.
From that sense, I think I
Yes,
get
in
what you're
that
saying.
sense,
I want to ask you. There was a
it's nothing
COI.
personal.
There was a COI, Mr. Rodney. There's a different government in place now. If you, for all the trauma and everything that you went through, do you believe that you have gotten closure now? If you are to have the opportunity to say to the government that, look, I want something to happen, what would you say? So the first question to you, have you gotten closure?
All right, I may not have had closure, I'll admit, but I'm not the sort of person who trades on going to authority and asking for favors. If I want a job, for example, I'm going to answer your advertisements. I'm not going to go and ask someone in the government service or in authority to make it easy for me to get a job, because I think I deserve a job as a citizen and on merit, right? So I have not really approached the government.
No, I'm not
on
talking about
anything.
regards a job or anything. I'm talking
Okay,
about
no, I
closure. I'm talking about justice.
All right, I have not approached the government, therefore, on any matter of trying to get justice. If I need to get justice, the proper place for that is the court.
And you don't believe, do you believe that the family could take, let's say, another inquiry or anything? Because I think there were some questions over that inquiry, the COI that was held a few years back?
That's a good one. I don't know, though they were outstanding testimony. There need to be some way of perhaps dealing with outstanding testimonies. I sitting here don't know how that might
You
be
believe that
done.
should be aired?
But perhaps that could be explored. But I don't think they should have another COI.
How does the family feel? Do you keep close to the rest of the family? Do they feel the same way that you feel?
Well, the rest of the family are abroad.
Uh-huh.
I think they are in a state where they are still in shock in terms of returning to Guyana and carrying on a life in Guyana. Not only is it that they might have been in shock in the first place, but having been abroad so long and having worked out their lives elsewhere, quite apart from how they might have felt before, they've established themselves where they are.
I want you to give a closing statement along these lines, or your thoughts. Your family, yourself, would have been heavily, I use Freddie's word and my word too, traumatized. You would have lived through the 80s and 90s, and of course, famous 2015 to 2020. And you have seen what this country, where it was and where it is now. If you have to say to the Guyanese people with regards to the spirit of Guyanese, what we should do as a country about healing and so on, I would love for you to hear your thoughts along those lines.
All right, a bit of a correction, and then I probably have to say I'm not an authority in what you're asking, but
No, but
still
you're a
say
citizen
something.
of Guyana, sir.
But the correction is that I left Guyana in
1982.
1982, late 1982, because we met in 1982, 1983 in Grenada. So since leaving Ghana in 1982, I really have only come back in 2017. So it's not as if I was here all the time, right? So I was here for quite some time, making a life overseas. But as to how Guyana moves forward, well, I think like any other nation, we have got to deal with the truths of what we're in. My one dissatisfaction is that we do not have a situation where we get some balanced views going out to the public in terms of information. We do have still a great deal of control by the administration. This administration, the administration before them, the administration before them. Because the whole issue, just on a personal note, again, before I come back to finish off, the entire story of Walter Rodney being on his way to the prison with a bomb was something that was put out by the state, and the state had virtually total control over the media at that time. You're in the media, so you will have an idea of how that might have changed since then. But I think there ought to be less of that. I think that the media itself, which is like current gentleman here, have an opportunity, have a responsibility to keep people informed in some balanced way, because information is important, and it's information which allows individuals to make informed choices.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodney. Freddie, closing.
So many people have insisted that I write my memoir. My daughter keeps saying all the time. But snippets of my memoirs are in my columns or in the television programs I did decades ago and in these programs. And I want to tell the viewers, I want to give another snippet of my memoir. Donald Rodney and I were caught. Donald Rodney, my wife, and I were caught in the American invasion of Grenada in 1983. And he was in my home when the American troops landed, and he stayed at my home throughout the war. When I was leaving, I didn't have any money, and Donald was very generous in facilitating me with a loan, which facilitated my existence back to Guyana. For that, I'll be forever grateful to Donald, and that he knows within my capacity, he can make any request of me. We finished. I am so elated that he ended on the media and the balance. And I'd like to read again something that I cannot get over, that is so shocking. I'd like Gildarie, just briefly let me read again what a scholar told me, a high-level scholar told me, that the Starbuck News is refusing to carry his letters because they say he cannot criticize civil society. Just briefly, I will read the letter for viewers who joined this program late. Here is what he said to me. I called and spoke to editor of Starbuck News, Anand Prasad, and he acknowledged receiving my letters. Said they weren't published because they're critical of civil society, including groups like Article 13. I said, why don't you publish it and let the public decide? He did not answer that. I reminded him that SN has published numerous articles, actually a couple of hundreds. I asked him what has changed. He simply said oil and gas. He characterized my employer, the government of Guyana, as my minder. I objected. I told him I know persons like Christopher Ram are honorable with high credibility. I then pointed out that my article on the civil society group, Article 13, no individual was named. I basically said to him an organization like Article 13 can and does have a personality. I told him I drew on the work of French philosopher Lacan, presented arguments based on his very influential work. He's the editor of the Starbuck News, still characterized my letters as having ad hominism. I strongly disagreed. I asked if I could consider the conversation as a matter of record so I can go public with it. He said yes. I asked him if it is not important to get the views of someone from the Guyana government and the Ali presidency. He said no. He will not tolerate letters from them if they criticize civil society groups. I told him many of Article 13 statements are clearly and conspicuously inaccurate and untruthful. He brushed that off. I would appreciate if you could write something on this. Many more things were said, but I can only relate in person. When a scholar of that nature could be told, no, we will not publish your letters if you criticize certain groups. Gildarie, this will have to be pursued. I would like to hear what the Guyanese Society have to say about this. That is my closing remark. The president would not be here on Friday. There's a intervening engagement, but he promised he will be here. We will announce our guest on Friday and take it from there. Donald, my respect and admiration always.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it. It's always a pleasure having you around. Of course, stay safe on the road, those in Guyana or wherever you are. Have a right to protect our people on our roadways. Let us don't do anything that is uncalled for. And of course, back to history. It is good listening to different sides, different narratives, and draw our own conclusions. We're not stupid people. I think we all have brains that we could be able to decipher. And of course, history books would have been written. We have people who are alive who would be given their takes, their recollections of history as they saw it, and of events that unfolded before their eyes. And it's good for us as people to go back, because history has a way of repeating itself, and of course we see there's linkages between what would have happened in the past and what happens in the future. And as we try to have an understanding of where we want to go, we should have an understanding of the past as well, as we try to build this country into a better country. So I want to say thank you very much to my co-host Freddie Kissoon, and of course Mr. Rodney. It was a pleasure listening to him, because I myself, I did not, early 80s, a lot of things happened in the 80s. Pretty young for myself, but of course as I go along, it is good to look back on it, because they were some very profound years for this country. So have a pleasant rest of the night, wherever you are, wherever you join us from. And we will be back with you on Friday. Thank you very much.